If you listen to mainstream media to get updates on how the fighting in Ukraine is evolving, you might get the impression that all of the fighting is taking place near the city of Kharkov, that Kharkov is the only front line in the entire war. As always, mainstream media tries to enormously play up every single victory that Ukraine achieves in the war, even if it's not a real victory, even if it is only a perceived victory. Western mainstream media will laser focus on that victory and completely ignore every single other event that is going on. And as a direct result, you have thousands of articles in mainstream media talking about this massive and extremely successful Ukrainian counteroffensive near Kharkov. Western media and even Western politicians are actively talking about the Ukrainians handing the Russian military its ass, even as the Ukrainian military is facing some very significant setbacks and is being forced to withdraw from strategically important locations across virtually every single other active front line in Ukraine. And as always, I am here to call out the media on their bullshit and hopefully to provide some other more accurate information along the way. But when it comes to this alternative and more accurate information, I have to warn everybody that there is a heavy fog of war in Ukraine right now, and we don't really know what the exact picture is like. There are some contradicting reports, but I think that it is safe to say that the narrative that mainstream media is feeding us is utter bullshit. There is at least enough accurate information out there to claim that much. With that said, when it comes to discussing the fighting in Ukraine, I think that one very important thing needs to be always kept in mind, and that is that the fighting that we are seeing right now isn't some kind of maneuver warfare or blitzkrieg. It is attrition warfare. And what that means is that it doesn't really matter who holds this or that piece of land right now at this particular moment, so long as that piece of land isn't strategically important. Because ultimately, the goal isn't to quickly capture and hold as much useless territory as possible. It is to bleed the opponent dry. And of course, who controls what land after the war ends is going to have an enormous amount of importance. But controlling territories after the war is over is not the same as controlling those territories as the fighting is still going on. Once again, provided that those territories do not hold any strategic significance. So in other words, provided that they're not located near some river crossing, some sort of fortification point or large city, provided that they're not valleys or hills or mountains which are very easy to hold and which can be used to launch attacks from, and other things of that nature. And with this in mind, I want to show everybody that this location around Kharkov, this piece of land that is to the north and east of Kharkov that contains a few villages, mostly flat terrain, is not strategically important terrain. It doesn't really matter at the end of the day who has control over these villages and this relatively flat land when we are talking about a war for all of Ukraine and when the biggest and by far the most important battles are happening in Donbass. And now, before we go any further, I would like to provide a little bit of background information on exactly which territories Ukraine has captured over the last week or so. First of all, I would like to thank the YouTube user Defense Politics Asia for this map. This is an interactive map that he created and it can be found in links in all of his videos. I will be providing a link to his channel in the video description. Anyways, this blue blob that is in the center of the screen, that is in the center of this map, represents the rough area that Ukrainian forces currently control. And pretty much all of this territory outside of the city itself has been recaptured by Ukrainian forces. So we're talking about 1,000 plus or minus square kilometers in total, once again, most of which is flat terrain. But more importantly, all of this territory is located on the fringe of what the Russians control. So It's not a situation where the Russian army grouping gets cut in two because the Ukrainians advanced in this area. The loss of this territory doesn't inhibit the Russians in maneuvering throughout the important areas that they care about in Ukraine, so the Izium front and the Donbass fronts. There have been no reports of Russian units being surrounded or cut off from their supplies because of this territory that has been captured. So essentially, the capture of this territory changes nothing on the strategic scale. And I really mean that it changes absolutely nothing. Russian forces most likely withdrew from this area on purpose, and I would now like to discuss why I think that this is the case. And the first point that I would like to note here is something that somebody on the Russian-speaking internet has pointed out, and that is that artillery from the city of Kharkov, as well as in other such dense urban areas, can fire upon targets that are in the immediate vicinity of these urban areas. And of course, what this means is that any Russian forces that are located near the city can be shelled, while those same Russian forces would find it extremely difficult to conduct counter-battery fire because of the risk of hitting residential areas or other civilian infrastructure. And for the exact same reason, Russia's dominance in the air can't really be used around Kharkov. Russia has complete and total superiority in the air over the contact line. And Russian forces are using this air supremacy to attack Ukrainian forces on the ground, especially as they are on the move, and also to, among other things, destroy heavy equipment and vehicles on the ground. And once again, this is extremely difficult to do in urban areas. This would be difficult even if Russia didn't care about destroying civilian infrastructure and residential buildings. But with Russia's ongoing policy of causing the minimum amount of damage to civilian infrastructure, to residential areas, it's even more difficult. So in short, because Ukrainian forces can shell Russian forces near the city of Kharkov, it doesn't really make sense to keep any troops near the city unless Russia is planning on taking the city, which right now, Russia clearly isn't planning to take Kharkov. However, if Russian forces withdraw from this area, then Ukraine can no longer subject them to artillery attacks without drawing out its artillery systems from urban areas, at which point those artillery systems become vulnerable to counter-battery fire, to airstrikes, and the Ukrainian forces will overall find it much more difficult to hold on and survive in these areas, that is, to the areas around the city where the Ukrainian forces are advancing to, than in the urban areas closer to the city. So at the end of the day, it makes sense for Russian forces to withdraw to the Russian border in this area, and maybe to create a buffer zone of about 5 to 10 kilometers between the Russian and Ukrainian borders, although given the fact that Ukrainian forces now control or seem to control a few villages that are located right on the border, frankly, I wouldn't be surprised if Russia doesn't even leave any sort of buffer zone and just withdraws from this area in a similar manner to how it withdrew from the area around Kiev and Sumy. And at that point, there will probably be a small Russian force that is located near the border, which would prevent Ukrainian forces from continuing their offensive into Russia itself. Although, for what it's worth, this withdrawal of Russian forces beyond the Russian-Ukrainian border would allow the Ukrainian forces to launch mortar and artillery attacks onto Russian villages, towns that are located near the border, as well as infrastructure such as railroads and bridges. Although it should be noted that Ukraine hasn't been doing this quite as often recently, and hasn't been doing this along other areas and along other parts of the Russian-Ukrainian border which Ukraine controls, so there is a good chance that they won't even try to shell Russian villages and population centers in this area, although they kind of have a track record of doing so, so I wouldn't be at all surprised if we hear some reports of Russian villages along the border being shelled. Okay, a quick note, a quick edit. Just as I was about to release this video, just as I was in the last stages of editing this video, there have been reports of attacks, most likely rocket attacks, in Belgorod region, which borders Kharkov region. Again, this is something that Ukrainian forces have a very long track record of doing, first in Donbass, where they have been doing this for 8 years, and then on several notable occasions, actually about a dozen occasions, they've already attacked Russian villages that are located near the border, and this is another one of these cases, so we shouldn't really be surprised. Preliminary reports are that 4 civilians have been injured and that 2 civilians have been killed as a result of the shelling. By the way, the village in question is the village of Soholy, which is located about 12 kilometers from the Ukrainian border. One more note to wrap up the Kharkov front. I've heard of some reports, primarily from English-speaking alternative media, that all of this territory was captured by a small number of Ukrainian soldiers, and that there are no Russian soldiers or virtually no Russian soldiers to oppose them. I've heard reports that as little as 500 soldiers on the Ukrainian side have captured all of this territory. And at the same time, some sources on the Russian side are saying that there is actually a lot of heavy fighting in this area, and that the number of soldiers that are involved in the fighting on both sides is rather high. I haven't heard of any specific figures, but definitely much larger than 500. And apparently, according to the same report, most of these soldiers on the Ukrainian side are draftees, conscripts, territorial defense forces that are being sent to fight in the front lines, backed up by a small number of professional soldiers. And the same reports suggest that the casualties of the Ukrainian side in trying to capture all of this area, and in successfully capturing it, that the casualties are quite high. Apparently, Russian forces aren't leaving without a fight, and Russian artillery as well as airstrikes are inflicting casualties on the advancing Ukrainian forces. Once again, I would like to emphasize, I have no way of knowing whether or not that is true. There are some very conflicting reports coming from various sources, and I think that we will have to simply wait a few more weeks to get some more accurate information on exactly what is going on in this area. So I don't want to speculate much further, but in conclusion, all I'm going to say is that I have no doubt that this area that Ukraine is recapturing has no strategic value, isn't going to affect the course of the fighting in Donbass region, and is going to be very easy to recapture for Russian forces once they gather the manpower and once the reason and the political objective to do so appears. Ukraine needed a victory, some kind of victory, which it could brag to Western audiences and to its own domestic audience about prior to May 9th Victory Day. The attack on Snake Island has failed, and has failed miserably. By the way, there have been more reports of attempted attacks, which have all resulted in the loss of Ukrainian equipment, and many of which have also resulted in the loss of additional manpower on the Ukrainian side. So the losses for Ukraine around Snake Island are even higher now than when I've made my previous video. Or at least in any case, that is what the Russian Ministry of Defense and Russian sources are saying. If you don't believe these, then I guess nothing has happened around Snake Island, or at the very least, nothing new, because at the very least, we have combat footage, we have videos of Ukrainian planes bombing Snake Island, and of a helicopter being destroyed there. The situation for Ukrainian forces in Donbass are looking increasingly grim, and of course none of these regions are being reported on by either Ukrainian media or the media in the West. It's like they don't even exist. But of course, you always need to report on something. It's not possible to be completely silent and pretend that the entire war isn't happening. And if you only report on the areas that you lost, then that also looks really, really bad. So simply put, Ukraine needed a military victory. No matter how insignificant that military victory is, it needed that victory simply to score PR points. And that's why Ukrainian forces attempted to take Snake Island a few days ago, which, as I've mentioned, is basically just this tiny rock in the Black Sea which has zero military significance. And I strongly suspect that this is also the reason why Ukrainian forces are attacking the Kharkov front, especially if the reports of these Ukrainian forces being significant in number are true. And of course, in Kharkov they got their military victory, and it's all that Western mainstream media is talking about. It's like all of these other places in Ukraine where the Russians have gained a foothold simply do not exist. To wrap up this video, a few quick notes about Russian advancements in Donbass. The most notable of these is perhaps the capture of the town of Popasnaya, which has a population of about 20,000. This town was officially secured on May 9th, although unofficially, de facto, it was under Russian control and under the control of the Donbass militias, which I collectively like to refer to as the Russian coalition. So Popasnaya has been under de facto control of the Russian coalition since around May 7th. Popasnaya isn't a big town if you only look at its population, but it is an extremely significant location because, first of all, there was a large contingent of the Ukrainian armed forces stationed there, and fighting over the city has been going on in some form or another. The town has been contested basically since the early days of the war. And of course, another reason why Popasnaya is very important is because it is located on high ground. Popasnaya is located at an altitude that is over 100 meters higher than its surrounding areas. So whoever controls Popasnaya ultimately controls this high ground, meaning that they get to use this high ground to extend the range of their mortar and artillery strikes. They get to use all sorts of vantage points, which can also be used as ambush locations. Someone has pointed out that this is one of the reasons why we are seeing an increased number of videos showing Russian ATGM strikes on Ukrainian positions. And there is the fact that Russian control over this area basically creates a bulge in the front lines and exposes the flanks of Ukrainian positions. And because this bulge is located on high ground, it essentially allows Russians to have better surveillance over the surrounding territories, which Russian forces have reportedly used to correct artillery strikes near the city of Zolote, where there have been also some significant Russian advances. And the fact that the high ground around Popasnaya is already under Russian control means that the surrounding areas, particularly around Zolote, will most likely soon fall under Russian control as well. Another important update is that Russian forces have crossed the river of Seversky Donets. This has allowed Russian forces to advance from the left bank of the river until the pontoon crossing was destroyed by Ukrainian artillery. However, reports are that despite the fact that this crossing was destroyed, Ukrainian forces haven't managed to clear out the positions that the Russians have built up on the left bank of the river. Near the city of Donetsk, reports are that the militia of the Donetsk People's Republic has taken the town of Kamenka, population 11,500, which is located near the city of Avdiivka. So these are some of the successes that Russian forces and the forces of the Donetsk and Luhansk People's Republics have had over the last few days. By the way, I'm not somebody who regularly analyzes these maps. Pretty much everything that you've heard in this section of the video where I've talked about Russian advances in various areas have come from either the English language YouTuber Defense Politics Asia or Russian language YouTuber Yuri Podolaka. And the reason why I wanted to record this section of the video is to essentially just show everybody that Ukraine isn't gaining more territory around Kharkov than the Russians are gaining in Donbass. Not to mention the fact that, once again, the territories that Russia is securing in Donbass are much more strategically important than what Ukraine is securing around Kharkov. So even as the mainstream media is laser focusing on Kharkov, the real battles are happening in other places, pretty much exclusively in Donbass, and Russia is clearly winning there. Even though I will reiterate one of the very first points that I made in this video, which is that what we are seeing unfold in Ukraine right now isn't maneuver warfare, it is attrition warfare. So whoever has temporary controls over this area or that area, doesn't really matter as much as who loses more equipment and more manpower. And the fact that the Russian coalition is gaining control of all of these strategically important locations should, at least in my opinion, only be used as an indicator that Russia is seeing more successes in the fighting than Ukraine is. And that is everything that I wanted to say in this video. Basically, don't believe mainstream media when it comes to how the fighting in Ukraine is evolving, or really about anything that concerns Ukraine. Or better yet, just don't believe mainstream media at all. And as always, if you enjoyed this video, if you found it informative, if you're watching this on YouTube, please be sure to hit the like button. It helps the video gain more traction. It helps the algorithm recommend it to more people. So maybe more people will be encouraged to listen to alternative news sources and not listen to the garbage that we're hearing from mainstream media. And also, the links in the video description will be to the channel of Defense Politics Asia, who makes everyday updates on how the fighting in Ukraine is evolving. Due to various circumstances, I can't make as many videos as I did before, but Defense Politics Asia is making multiple videos actually every single day. So please be sure to subscribe to his channel as well if you are interested in regular updates on how the fighting on the ground in Ukraine is evolving. Also in the video description will be links to my other channels on Telegram and on Rumble. On Telegram, I occasionally make small updates. Telegram, like Rumble, is a free speech platform with no political censorship, but it also allows me to write text updates, which essentially allow me to convey additional information without having to record entire videos. Also, some people have suggested that I enable comments in my Telegram channel. The only reason that I haven't done so up until now is because I don't really know how, as embarrassing as it sounds, but I'll try to enable them once again after this video releases. And if you are watching this video on Rumble, the link in the video description will be to my YouTube channel. So anyways, with all of that said, I thank you for watching this video. I hope that you found it informative. I hope that you enjoyed it, and I wish you all a wonderful day.